evening, everyone. My name is Quandra Spates, and I'm here with my co-host Patrick Brutus and our guest speaker, Ro Davis. Thank you all for tuning in, and welcome to our show presented to you by Help One, Save One. Help One, Save One is a community-inspired organization. As you can see, our email address is helponesaveone@hotmail.com. Telephone number is 312-313-6977. And you can also check us out on Help One Save One on Facebook. Our objectives include educating and empowering the community with information designed to inform and enlighten. This is a live interactive show on CAN-TV. Therefore, we're asking and we encourage everyone to call in with your comments to 312-738-1060. Last week, we discussed economic empowerment and the lack thereof in our communities with our guest speaker, Amara Enye, who did an excellent job on explaining to us cooperative economic models and how they can strengthen and build our communities. So if you didn't see the show, please check it out. As mentioned in previous shows, that the Kerner Commission report will be the foundation to lay the groundwork on subjects and topics we will be discussing over the remaining weeks. It is our intent to create a progressive series of informative discussions regarding our journey as African Americans, people examining where we once were, where we are today, and where we want to go. So today we have another excellent guest, a very interesting topic on gentrification and its impact on the African American community. So with that, Patrick is going to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Quandra, and good afternoon. Glad to be here again. I'm Patrick Brutus, and our guest today is Ro Davis. Ro is a social entrepreneur and social activist who is committed to the resurrection and redemption of Black people. But our guest is also more than that. He is also a professional networker in the district sales industry and motivational speaker. He has been self-employed since college, built several multi-million-dollar businesses primarily in the real estate industry, and finally has put it all together and combined all of his talents and experiences to start an online small business community called the BOP Network. In some ways, Mr. Davis, our guest, Ro, is the perfect guest because he combines his passion for uplifting the community with his experience in being able to identify market trends that we as Black people, need to be aware of if we're going to move forward in the city, state, and country.
Absolutely.
With that, we welcome Ro Davis to the broadcast today. Welcome, Ro.
Thank you, and I certainly appreciate the both of you for having me on today.
Okay, and so our topic today is gentrification. I'm going to start with the definition, and then we're going to have a small video to enlighten our topic. The Webster's Dictionary defines gentrification as the process of renewal and rebuilding accompanying the influx of middle class or affluent people into deteriorating areas that often displace poor residents. As the root of the word suggests, gentrification is linked to social, economic, class rather than race, although those factors can coincide. Let's take a look at the video.
So when I answer the question, should I talk to y'all or talk to the camera?
You be natural. You be natural. She's gonna be a robot, and I'm gonna be a robot. that was a lot in that video to hopefully highlight us about what gentrification is in reality and what it is in perception. Ro, after desegregation, it was said that a lot of our best and brightest left the black community only to never look back. 50 years later, we are starting to see the devastating effects of it.
Absolutely.
In addition to racial wealth gaps and inequalities between white and black households, research has also shown that blacks on an average are at least twice as likely as whites to be poor and more unemployed. Households headed by a black person earn on average little more than half of what the average white households earn. And in terms of their median net worth, white households are about 13 times as wealthy as black households, a gap that has grown wider since the Great Recession. Yet despite all of this, we have some blacks who feel that they have made it. After seeing that video and getting an explanation of what gentrification is, in your experience as a real estate expert in the market in Chicago and Cook County, and perhaps other places, Ro, are you seeing the trends actually match the reality out there in the marketplace? And what are your thoughts on the video? And let's jump right into the conversation.
Okay, so your question is the trends in the marketplace, like, are they consistent with the narrative that you've shared?
Right,
Or-
so are you seeing in the marketplace in regards to some of the communities where we're seeing properties being sold or property or where neighborhoods are being gentrified? Are we seeing what we saw in the video where there are actually poor people being moved out and industries and businesses and good for the commercial growth in those areas? Are we seeing those trends actually play out in Chicago?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a part of the process. I don't think that gentrification or gentrification is a bad thing. I think that the issue is that we haven't been leading that charge. I think that, regentrification is our reparations. The contract to rebuild Black America, if we would take the leadership role in that process, it would give us the ability to do good and to do well.
You're basically talking about controlling the destiny of the
Absolutely.
future moving forward.
The problem is, in my opinion, it's not so much that we're, change, and some people are naturally going to fall in the gaps of that change. I think that the bigger issue is that we're not leading that process. So in not leading that process, we're leaving the fate of our community to other individuals who may be, and who are in many cases, insensitive to the folks that will be left behind. The people from the community who are indigenous, who feel the heartbeat of those individuals, I believe the creativity and the inspiration to actually make the shift will be coupled with opportunities to create a pipeline of possibility for those individuals who are getting left behind.
That's amazing. And so when you say all that, Ro, it makes me wonder, folks who are coming into neighborhoods to take advantage of disinvestment, vacant properties, vacant land, where they would then propose to rebuild these communities where we predominantly are located, where we live. They come in the guise of multicultural. That's part of always the sales pitch they say is we want to diversify the neighborhood, make it multicultural. But the problem here is that when you have too much multicultural, you are left with no culture.
Right, especially when we haven't taken the time to embrace and define and stand on solid ground as Black people in our culture. So we naturally get lost in the rainbow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The rainbow doesn't have black in it.
No, that's just at night when it ain't even a rainbow present. So go ahead, you were asking a question.
Go ahead, Quandra.
Well, actually, I have a few talking points. I like to kind of tee it up. Once again, I explained to you that we use the Kerner Commission report
Right.
to lay the groundwork. So, as you know, during the rise of 1968, the commissioner wrote a report called the Kerner Commissioner Report that stated by 1985, the Negro population in central cities is expected to increase by 72% to approximately 20.8 million. Coupled with the continued exodus of white families to the suburbs, this growth will produce majority Negro populations in many of the nation's largest cities. The future of these cities and the burgeoning Negro population is grim. Most new employment opportunities are being created in suburbs and outlying areas. Fast forward that to 2018. our circumstances haven't changed very much. We're still have a lot of lack of opportunities in our community. We still don't have the investments in our community to grow our communities, except white families are coming back from the suburbs into the cities, consequently pushing out African Americans out of the city by way of gentrification.
Right.
Can this be a direct link to racial inequalities and segregation, and if so, how?
Well, first of all, I think that certainly, there's always going to be a racial undertone when you have white folks and black folks. That's a dynamic that, has its own set of issues. But I believe that what's happening today is, there's an energy crisis, that, no one's really talking about, that may be also driving the gentrification process in terms of individuals moving from the suburbs into the center of commerce. People want to live, work, and play in the same environment. And a lot of folks, those people, and when I say those people, I'm saying the futurists, the people who create Kerner commissions and the people who have the sense to pay attention to them know that there is an energy crisis coming if we don't redefine some things. So folks are looking at the cities that they left running, quite possibly, from black migration and trying to, create a definable area where they had absolute control over. Those individuals recognized that they lost or left prime real estate, areas like Cabrini Green that was, in the center of downtown, and South Loop.
It's completely transformed now.
Absolutely,
Right.
Bronzeville. See, the other part of the story is that if you're a developer, there's nothing left to develop. The foundation of real estate is to buy low and to sell high. And so when you look at the fact that all the other areas have been regentrified, and then you complement that with the looming energy crisis, then now you see white folks wanting to move back in close to the center of economic power. And naturally, the black folks, who were moving out to the suburbs to get away from us, are now inside of this shuffle.
So what you're saying is there's like a direct relation to the flux that has been created between where black people have run to where things are going now, and then us being on the outside of the perimeter versus more towards the epicenter of activity.
Right.
And so when you say that, it's very interesting when you look at that dynamic. And so, but is it fair to say that beginning of the 50 years ago, so in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, is it safe to say in a city like Chicago, not unlike many others, but similar to the Washington, D.C. metro area, maybe the Queens borough in New York, is it fair to say that folks guarded against the encroachment of other folks coming into their communities and in a way made their neighborhoods so hyper-segregated in a way, in a manner to protect against gentrification or encroachment, as it were, back in the 70s and 80s?
So are you saying black folks, or did you mean to say white folks in terms of...
No, I meant to say black folks, because if you look at Chicago, many of our neighborhoods are hyper-segregated, and they have always been. So Chicago is a very hyper-segregated city. Okay. White folks predominantly live on the north side. Black folks live on the south and west sides. And so that is by choice. For example, myself, when I purchased my home, I decidedly, looked at property in the south side.
Okay.
And so do we have that dilemma where we are maybe victims of our own creation in a way?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that black people look that deeply into the issue. I think that being intermingled was more of a white issue than it was a black issue. Right. And I think that white people are more concerned about that than black people. I think that we don't really have an issue in it. When you look at the reason why white people have an issue with intermingling their resources and intermingling, interracial relationships, they have a issue with that because it could very well end up, like the whole idea of, what's the word I'm looking for? They can't mix with us and come out on top. So
Right, you're saying the
right.
Governor Rauner blend of chocolate milk.
right. So there's an issue there. So that's why they've always wanted to remain segregated, because they can't afford to integrate and come out on top.
Right.
That's not an issue for black people. We love everybody
Right.
because we don't have that sense of genetic annihilation looming in our consciousness.
Right. We don't have the supremacy.
Right,
going
that
on.
supremacy is really an inferiority complex,
And-
not to shift the direction.
And before Quandra asks her next question, I want to remind our viewers at home to please call in. This is a call-in show. We want to hear from you. 312-738-1060. Please call in.
Okay, with that, as wealthier residents migrate back into the city, as we were just discussing, into once low-income, often minority neighborhoods, often long-term residents are priced out of their homes, their communities. The real question is, how does this dynamic play out, and is displacement inevitable, and how do we protect people from being displaced after the neighborhood is gentrified?
Well, I think that some displacement is going to be inevitable.
Okay.
I think that the way that we can reduce that reality, because that's the negative impact of regentrification. But again, I think that when we begin to take over the financial destiny of our community and stop looking outside of our community for others to create jobs for ourselves, we have the power and the responsibility to raise the economic wherewithal of the individuals in our community. I think that there's going to be additional sensitivities when, we are at the helm of leadership. The problem is we're relying on other people to create value for us, and our vision typically has been connected to our pain.
So you've gone
You
back
know.
to this theme during this broadcast today about owning the opportunity, being responsible
Yes.
for the mission. And so I want to ask you, and I agree with you. I completely agree with you, especially in an urban center such as Chicago, where we have multiple factors that adversely affect the capability of us to control our destiny in those particular areas that you have mentioned here today, Mr. Davis, quite expertly, I must add. Is all gentrification bad?
Well, I don't think that regentrification is bad. I think that anything that doesn't change grows. That doesn't grow, change dies. Change is necessary for growth. And I believe that breakdowns create breakthroughs. And I think that the breakdown of our communities presents a tremendous opportunity for our community. It's, the old adage is the glass half full or is it half empty? And when I look on 79th Street in particular, an area that I'm concerned with, and I look at all of those vacant storefronts.
We actually have a caller.
okay,
I'm
good.
sorry. Go ahead, caller. What's your question or comment?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Great show.
you.
What gets me is that everybody blames the Republicans are the white people. They're smart. They went and left here for blacks and Mexicans. Now, I happen to be a proud Mexican veteran from Vietnam, and when I come home, I come to a city that I'm more afraid of to live in than when I was in Vietnam. It's not only the white people's fault. You know whose fault it is? It's the black people, it's the Mexican people, the Hispanic, Rahm Emanuel, all of the aldermen. They let this happen. That's why you get a big migration.
Caller, what's your question?
Why are the black people moving out of Chicago? Is it because of nothing's being done for them?
Okay, thank you for your call. We'll
Good
try to answer your question.
Thank you.
Ro, he wants to know, and maybe many of our other viewers at home also want to understand this trend and migration pattern where folks are leaving the city in droves. As you know, in the 2010 census, over 190,000 African Americans left the Chicago metropolitan area.
Well, my answer may be a bit controversial in that I believe, and the more I look at this issue and I look at the history of individuals who have targeted our communities for growth, if you will, and I look at Chicago and the power that Chicago has, I think that, and then I look at the vision for Chicago, when you start looking at the futurists and the things that they have predicted. They say that in 2030, that the black population in Cook County will be less than 1%. How do you know that unless there's a strategy to accomplish it? And so when I see black people, and this is a part of what I was getting at when I say that the reason why we don't see a value in the land is because, you know, we have had bad experiences and we know what's happening on the ground. So our vision is connected to our pain. And so what's happening is you have a lot of black folks that's running from the fire while white folks is running into it. And they're running into it, the fire sale, because they have a vision that's bigger than our pain. If we're going to make a difference in our community, we have to also have a vision that's bigger than what we see today.
Well, do you think that with that, does gentrification spread evenly into adjacent disinvested neighborhoods? And if not, what factors influence which neighborhoods get the opportunities and an investment and which neighborhoods do not, when they can be sitting right next to each other? Prime example, Austin and Oak Park. You can look, you can throw a rock and see Austin, vacant lots,
Right.
devastation,
Right.
Oak Park, beautiful homes.
Right.
So before you answer that question, let's go to our caller. Caller, welcome to the show, and what's your question?
Yes, I have a question and perhaps a comment. The gentrification is occurring because there's a population that's targeted for gentrification, as the gentleman is speaking of. Now, during the 60s, we are familiar with the Kerner Commission report, which identified that the urban communities would be overpopulated with black people in 10 years, which would from 1967 to 77. But there was a move to reverse that, and they did that with incarceration, with opening up the suburbs, with shooting of people, and the continued lynching, which we consider to be over, but it still exists today with the I Fear for My Life strategy that's going on. So how do we educate our people to identify the onslaught of the attack on the black community?
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Let's try to get that answered in 15 seconds or less.
Right, right. And therein lies the struggle. That's the heavy lifting that we have to do beyond the boycotts, beyond the marches, beyond the protests that are directly proportional to what other people outside of our community are doing to us. Then there's the ground war of how we educate, stimulate, and unify our community to understand, number one, we at war, and then number two, to do something about it. Therein lies the real fight.
Great. Awesome.
So I know Quandra asked a very detailed question, but we would be remiss, Ro, if we didn't give you an opportunity to talk about some of the exciting things that you're leading on the 79th Street corridor. And we understand that you're a very successful businessman in the community. You also have a not-for-profit called the New Life Movement. Why don't you just wrap up with us here for about a minute or so and tell us exactly how your passion for business, the Bob Center, and the New Life Movement all kind of intersect.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that opportunity. So the New Life Movement is a movement that I started roughly about 15 years ago to actually pick up the baton from the civil rights struggle. I felt that our generation had not moved into the fight for liberation. But I also realized that our fight today is beyond civil rights. It's about economic and political empowerment. And so our vision is to use home ownership and small business development as the anchors to that. So the New Life Movement is the umbrella, but the programmatic thrust is BOP Project 5000. So BOP is an acronym that stands for Building Our Posterity, and is built on the premise that the children are not our future, but rather we are our children's future. The goal is to be intentional about the next generation. So what we're missing in our community is a opportunity to control the assets. of that community. So we've created the Bach Business Center. We have a real estate initiative. But what's more important about that is that it's duplicatable. So we're giving the community a buy-in.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Well, with that, thank you so much, Ro. We really
Thank you.
appreciate you. It's such an honor to have you here. Callers, thank you, viewers, for seeing our show. And once again, please tune in next week. Thank you.
All right.